responsibility at Chubb is I'm the head of our litigation management process. That includes the use of our electronic billing tool. I have primary responsibility in North America, but I also educate the process as we apply it worldwide.
Thanks, Jonathan. Okay, so obviously our topic today is about AI within legal operations. So, let's start with the questions of why do we apply AI within legal operations? Obviously, this is my viewpoint, but AI can drive real value and improved outcomes. In short, it makes people more efficient. It lets you do it faster or do more with less. It also drives consistent quality. The good thing about AI is it doesn't have a bad day. It doesn't get distracted trying to multitask. It doesn't have the ebbs and flows depending on its relation to its last cup of coffee. The second area is it's most valuable in cases with big data combined with expert insights. Its capabilities around identifying patterns and behaviors across large data sets are unmatched and typically hard to mimic just by a person. And third, change management and close partnership are key to good results. Driving adoption by cutting through that fear of the unknown. That comfort level is already building as we see the use of AI grow from where we were a number of years ago. But there's still a curve there. There's still some folks who are, less eager to jump into this pond than others. So as we look at a couple of stats here, this one is from the Blickstein Group's Law Department Operations Survey from last year. As we look at the number of respondents in 2020 who have the belief that most law departments will be using AI for some type of legal work in the next 3 years, we see that's now at 65%, which is a fairly healthy number, and it's a strong increase over the 58% that we saw from the same survey in 2019. So really the consensus around the industry is that people are more and more willing to dip their toe in the water for AI. So as we look at some of the applications of AI and some of the different areas within the adoption curve, you can see that billing and spend management, that's one of the ones that has kind of a larger number. 12.5% of respondents out there, they're already using AI in support of that process in some way. And you can see that a fair amount are 23% are planning to do more of this, but more than half, and that's really consistent across all of these different areas. They're not considering it now, and it's not something that they're currently doing. Pre and post execution within contract management are ripe for AI-based solutions, as are e-discovery and document review. Both really some of the earlier adopters of AI technology across legal. But as you look at things like insight and prediction, which is one of the topics we're going to spend a little bit of time on today, you can see that that's very early in the curve. In fact, at the time of this survey, none of the respondents were already doing this. Okay, so what does this mean for for your organization? There's opportunities and challenges. It expands the strategic focus and drives better outcomes, whether that's better results, lower costs, increased compliance. As we look at efficiency, it leverages your existing team to do more. So either do the same faster, do more with less. It's beneficial to productivity in those areas. And what's important to many is it's an opportunity to lead your organization in leveraging technology. We're seeing AI not just within legal, but we're seeing it span multiple different areas outside of legal, and this is our opportunity to shine and be at the forefront of bringing AI into the company. From a challenges perspective, you need to match the AI investment with the strategic priorities. You'd think that may go without savings or without saying, but if you have something you don't want to bring AI in just for the sake of bringing AI. You want to have priorities and then find where technology is able to support those priorities and start making those investments to bring those in at that time. Engage the team in the change. We talked a little bit about adoption, but it's really important. If it's hard to use, they're less likely to use it. So invest in training, make sure it's the right solution and easy to use and make sense for the task that they're already trying to do. And similar to that, integrate it into the day-to-day work. So make sure it's part of the workflows, so easy to use. And finally, understanding your data is key. Data is a theme as we look at AI solutions. We often say that AI is only as good as the data that's behind it. So having clean data, a lot of data helps, but also understanding how it works within your workflows and how AI will be beneficial to leverage that is key to part of an implementation process. So we look at it, really those three different areas for successful AI. So big data and analytics, quantity and quality. It's only as good as the data that trains it and maintains it. You need a lot of it, but it also has to be the right data and quality data. Expertise. AI supplements humans, not replaces them. It's not taking over all human job functions at this point. As good as the models can be, they still rely on the training and feeding of information by people so that they're able to learn and improve over time. And finally, that integrated workflow. It needs to be easy to be successful. It goes without saying, but if it's difficult to use, people aren't going to use it. So as we wrap up this portion here, before we move into our discussion with Jonathan, I wanted to hit on the high-level preview into the three areas and solutions we're going to talk about today. Really, despite lots of progress in the last 5 years, 10 years, getting complete visibility into legal department spend remains a challenge. Most or even all law departments are still receiving some amount of their invoicing in paper format. So not necessarily something in the mail, but a PDF file from outside counsel being submitted via email, and that just makes capturing that information challenging. If you're doing your best, you're manually entering it into a system somewhere, probably without much, if any, detail, which is really not giving you some of the benefits you get out of electronic data. So no billing guideline enforcement, limited analytics capabilities, limited insight into total spend. So one of the solutions we'll talk about today with Jonathan is our intelligent invoice conversion service. That's AI-powered invoice conversion capabilities that use machine learning to pull data from an invoice file and convert it into an electronic template, so you can do all the things that you can do with your electronic invoices. Second, everyone wants to make better informed decisions. Historically, that meant looking at outcomes retroactively through reports or by looking at raw data to be able to identify what happened, what can we do next time. We're early on in this, but the predictive insight capabilities exist to be able to take that data and make it real time, so that it's there and available and presented for your users at the time that they're making a decision in this. So we're currently focusing on three areas here at this point: hiring the right firm, managing to an appropriate budget, understanding total case costs and durations. but we have some plans to move on from there. And our final, topic that we'll be discussing today is around AI within the invoice review process. We understand and it's accepted that the addition of AI to a review process improves bill review outcomes. Aside from efficiency gains, there's just things that you can find with AI that aren't apparent to a reviewer looking at an invoice, such as leveraging natural language processing in order to cut through incorrect coding and inconsistent language, and also advanced pattern recognition across large data sets. Here we offer this really in two flavors. One is where we pair AI plus legal experts to fully manage a bill review program. The other is, there's a set of law departments out there that they already have a review team in place, and are just looking for how can you help make them better? How can you provide additional AI insights, to help us within that process? So with that, let's move on and talk with Jonathan about Chubb's journey to optimize their experience within these areas. Jonathan, thanks again for doing this with us today. Why don't we start with, in the order we showed these last three, with the paper invoice problem. What was your driver for continuing to have these non-electronic invoices in place there?
Thanks, Jeff. Happy to talk through this with some folks. So again, my responsibility at Chubb, an insurance company, is primarily on the claim side. I do work with the process that we have in our corporate legal side, but instead of the 80-20 rule, it's like 97-3 as to sort of where we spend our money and where the exposure is. So I'm going to be mostly focusing on portions of the litigation world that is litigation, as opposed to regulatory work, bankruptcy work, that sort of thing. We have some of it, but it's not what's really driving Chubb's outcomes to a large extent, because we spend so much more on sort of claim issues. One of the sort of truisms about any electronic bill process is it's only as good as what goes into it. Okay. And there's really two kinds of law firm. And I'm saying this in kind of the simplistic way that we discuss it internally. There are those that can and will submit their bills themselves, and those that can't or won't. Okay. Now, in insurance world, because of the nature of how often our policyholders, maybe a big commercial insured, might have choice of counsel. We might be in a part of the country where the sophistication of the law firm might not be the same as a major national law firm with 50 people in the billing department. Sometimes technical capability or willingness is a thing. Okay. A bill is no more accurate if it's submitted to us in a PDF than if it's submitted into a machine. You still have to do the same sorts of things with a PDF or a Word document or something shows up in an envelope as you do if it's submitted electronically. You have to make sure it's not a duplicate invoice. You have to make sure that the rates are the right rates. And if it's a big invoice, then that could be problematic. Depending on who's managing the case, they may not have any idea what the rates are supposed to be, because maybe it was negotiated somewhere else. So they have to keep going back to a table. In our view, the likelihood of a human being doing all of the stuff that a machine can do far better in a couple seconds is certainly not uniform, right? Our people are well meaning, but if you take an insurance claim adjuster or probably an internal lawyer working in a corporate legal department and ask them to name the 10 most important parts of their job, reviewing the lawyer's bill is probably number 11 or maybe lower. Okay. Um, so practically speaking, they're not really looking at the PDF. They're not checking it. They're not with the same level of rigor a machine can. So what do? Okay. What we did is we partnered with ELM to have a process that takes the bill that comes in the door in something other than a leads format. And it is a manual process to a certain extent to take that bill and convert it over to T360. It gives us two benefits as a result. One, um, it's in the same platform as everything else. So when we need to run a report, we can actually get a report on what we spend. We don't have to footnote it by saying, well, this is only for the part of the spend that's in the billing system, but we pay some other stuff outside and we can't report it. Or even worse, we're required to report it. Then we've got to start figuring out what manual kind of way through our underlying, payment systems we'd use to try to figure out what else we paid. So we've got much better, more robust, more comprehensive data to the extent that our executives, when we run a report on what we paid a particular firm or in a particular business unit, um, they know that it's not just directional, it's close enough that it's something they can bank on. That if there's something that's not in there, it's the very, very rare exception, and they don't have to worry about it. Number one. Number two, it allows the, in our case, claim professionals, perhaps others, legal professionals, to concentrate on what they're best at, which is managing the case, managing the assignment, managing the relationship with counsel. We really don't want our people having to stop what they're doing and managing their files. Whether it's a lawyer or a claim handler, it doesn't matter. You don't want them to stop what they're doing in their day job and sit there and try to find the rate agreement and look at that rate agreement and compare it to every line item on an invoice that's in a piece of paper, crossing off on a printout somewhere, or making an Excel spreadsheet somewhere of all the lines that have a math error, adding up all the reductions, and then issuing the payment for some lesser amount. That's not a valuable use of their time. Machine can do it in a second, maybe five. They can't. So it allows them to focus better on the things that they're really critical to do, which might include reviewing the substance of the bill, but not the administrative part. In our implementation, I think this is the standard way it's done in T360. Once that bill is converted to T360, it still goes to our claim handlers the same exact way that they get a bill that comes into T360 from the law firm. It goes in, it goes directly to them. They can look at it as no different a workflow than they have with their regular billing. That includes reviewing the substance to make sure that, you know what, I saw that pleading. It was 10 pages, but 9 of it was boilerplate. I'm not spending 42 hours for it. That's something that they can do. Okay. And nobody else on the planet can do. We give it to them. It gives her a more streamlined, effective, um, singular workflow to not have to worry about kind of all these outliers and different processes. And then once it's done in T360, it goes through the same payment process that we use for our regular bills too. So it makes the payment process much easier as well.
Thanks, Jonathan. So obviously, this is dependent on machine learning as these templates come through. How was the implementation process, and how was kind of the early days in of using this solution?
Of all the changes that have come in T360, and I would say to this group, stuff that wasn't smooth, this one's pretty smooth because from an outside perspective, the law firm doesn't know the difference, right? They send in an email and then they get paid. They send in an envelope and they get paid. So the law firms don't have any learning curve. There is some learning curve with the claim professionals. They have to do certain things to get the case set up the right way, right? There's a process that they have to go through to say, we negotiated the rates with this firm and we're paying $400 an hour for partners. That has to make its way to the operations team that takes care of doing the conversion so it can get set up properly in T360. That workflow took some time to become second nature. Um, some people, it's still not second nature because they don't do it that much, but that's an individual training thing. It's certainly not a process thing. And there is the need to do the cost benefit analysis because some of the work in this invoice conversion process has to be done by people within Chubb, has to be done within people of the customer company that's submitting the bills, right? You can't have the AI team, you can't have the operations team on the time metric side, on the ELM side, um, chasing down claim handlers to find out whether somebody's a partner or not. It just doesn't work. So there is to a certain extent some overhead and full count head cost is not free. right? So there is a cost benefit analysis that has to be done of internal. I can tell you that on our side, for those that are comfortable and familiar with this kind of model, we actually partnered with a company in India to take care of the administrative end on our side of the ledger. So it's not particularly expensive, but it's more than zero. And a little bit of a learning curve to get them trained the right way too.
Perfect, thanks. We actually have a couple of related questions to this in the Q&A. So while I said we'll deal with it at the end, we might as well deal with it now. We're in,
Sure.
in the right context. So the first is, it seems that we're talking about is the assistance AI can provide to a law firm. If so, is there any benefit to law departments and their legal counsel? I have my answer. I think it's kind of a mutual benefit. Um, but
I,
what
I,
do you think?
I'll answer mine. Our entire focus is on benefit to Chubb. Now, if that works with the law firm to submit a more accurate bill that gets through the review process to payment more quickly, that's a benefit. But our implementation of AI has been and will be focused on allowing us to get better results for us and our insureds. And to the extent, for example, that we get to bill review in a couple minutes, if the AI is better at reducing a bill than a human being would be, because it's easier to detect mistakes made by a law firm, that's certainly not to the benefit of the law firm.
Yeah, thanks. Um, I agree. I think there's a mutual benefit here. Our targeted benefit, like Jonathan mentioned, um, is to our corporate insurance customers. But I definitely see benefits to the law firm in that, where we see on average kind of 3 to 5% of a law department spend still going through a paper invoice process, some higher than others. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that there's an actual reason. Like I know Chubb has some actual reasons why certain invoices come through in a non-electronic format. And then there's also firms that may be smaller, maybe regional, maybe slow to adopt, and this kind of solution helps them hang on for longer and continue to kind of operate within the status quo, while getting the corporate customer the outcomes that they're looking for. But so I kind of see a mutual benefit there.
I'll add one other just concept for the crowd on this one. It is an easy implementation and compliance process to say, hard stop, all bills must be in T360, all bills must be in Passport, right? You've got a rule. You've got two different ways that the bills get in: firms submit them or they're converted, right? It makes for an easy message to implement, and the more folks you have in your organizations, the more different perspectives there might be on why rules are optional. Uh, Not that people are looking to cheat. They're not, right? They're doing their best. But sometimes expedience is expedience. And they're like, I won't fight with the law firm to get them to submit this. I'll just pay it from my desk, or I'll put it in line for payment with the AP group, right? But if you have a process that says one way or the other, or two ways, the bill's got to be in your e-billing platform, and you have a singular point of exit from that workflow that goes to AP, that goes to your feeds, that goes to your manual payment process, then it becomes much more easy to implement compliance, to ensure that the data is right, to make sure that you're paying the right amount for the services you're being billed. Because as soon as you have outliers that are allowable, you will have outliers, and you will have stuff that just goes outside. And if it's outside, it's not controlled, right? And maybe you're paying the wrong rate because somebody's not checking the rate list. So that's just it's just a good way to kind of herd the cats a little bit, not the people, but just to make sure you're funneling everything into the right process.
Sure. All right, we have a second question related to the topic that I think is good to call out here. So, is there a materiality threshold you use to decide if you're going to convert from PDF to electronics? For
No,
example, are there certain law firms that submit so little it's not worth it?
no, actually, the law firms that submit little are the ones that we end up converting, right? We're Ethan, I think you were linking two different concepts there. We don't have a materiality threshold because to convert a 2-line item invoice takes the operations team 5 minutes and it's done, right? It's easy, it's done. Um, with regard to law firms that submit so little it's not worth it, you still want to make sure whether it's a bill that we're paying the right amount, and that if you give a business unit a report on what they spend, that it includes what they spent on that small law firm that only maybe had one case. It's not harder for the law firm because the law firm doesn't have anything to do with it. So really, then it's just a matter of, do you want to set a threshold to have to footnote stuff? We don't.
Perfect. Okay. So I think that's it for the questions on this topic. So why don't we move on to predictive insights? I know that's one of the more interesting use cases we do together, and one that we did a lot of joint work together on during the creation process. Full transparency for the crowd. We work with our customers on a lot of these larger solutions. So this is one that our data science team, Chubb's data science team, the claims users kind of all participated together on, and helping to get to the best quality and the right solution. Um, so I mean, obviously, this was something that's relatively new, and it's not necessarily coming from, we're doing one thing to solve this, now we want to do something better and more efficient. Getting this type of information earlier in the process is new. That's why in the slides at the beginning of the deck we saw that 0% are doing this right now of the survey respondents. So how did we get here? How did we come together to kind of start this process of working together on this?
Um, just to make sure, Jeff, to calibrate, we're talking about primarily the decision support steps that we're taking now. Is that what you
Yeah,
want to focus on
yeah,
for this purpose?
absolutely.
Right. So um, we have something like 1,200 claim professionals in the United States. Three-quarters of them hire lawyers sometimes. Some of them hire lawyers all the time. We have something like, because of the nature of, and again, you're talking to representatives of the largest publicly traded insurance company in the world, right? So we've got kind of a big pool of stuff, and large numbers are complicated to manage. But if you're a claim handler handling just a straightforward casualty loss, you have, depending on what part of the country you're in, anywhere from one or two approved firms to 20, right? In the New York area, there might be 20 firms that are on our approved list. New York area is pretty big, and you have some that handle some smaller cases, some that handle bigger cases. You could have employment practices cases, discrimination, harassment, that sort of thing. In the LA metro area, you might have a couple dozen. There are 40 some odd workers' comp firms in the LA area. I mean, that's the size of Rhode Island to the LA area, right? So um, when you're the claim professional and you have an obligation to hire the right firm for the right case, because even more so than we have an obligation to ourselves and our shareholders, we've got an obligation to our insureds. We got to give them the best counsel we know. Well, claim handler is going to look at the approved list and they'll have used zero to something of those firms. They might have used them all. They might have used some of them. They may be sitting near people. Well, in COVID, they're not sitting near anybody, right? But even so, if they're working in a big group, they could be sitting near people who have worked with some, all, or none of those firms too. So they're looking at an approved list. They've got a need to find the best firm for a case, and they may not know them. They might know two and think the firm that they recognize is the right firm, not recognizing that one of the other 18 is maybe better, or five of the other 18 might be better. So how do we help with that? Right? The historical way of dealing with that particular issue is anecdotal. You talk to your colleague, you send an email to the litigation management group, you get some sort of historical feedback from the people you have to speak to, and you throw a dart and you hope you're doing the right thing because you get the best information you can gather within the time frame that you have to do it. And in an insurance company, somebody submitted a claim to us, they want counsel then. They don't want us to do research for 3 weeks. They need their attorney. They want to talk to their attorney that day. They got sued, right? So we do it as well as we can, as comprehensively as we can. We do a pretty good job. Companies successful. Our insureds like buying from us. We keep getting bigger, so we do an okay job, but it's not foolproof. So in order to improve that process, one of the things that we are looking at is whether AI can assist. Now we'll talk a little bit, and I know Jeff, you had I think italics bold for the data, identify your data and have your data available. We'll talk about that a couple times in the next probably 15 minutes or so before the Q&A. Um, when you have a new assignment, there's a right firm or two for it if you have a population of firms that are appropriate. There's some that are better than others. There's different factors that go into what the right firm is. In our view, the lowest rate is almost never the main consideration, right? Because you might have a really bad case or a really complicated case that requires more sophisticated and more expensive firms. So you can't just look at the cheapest rates on there. That's no better than I use three of the firms. I'll pick one of them. Um, we're real good at 3 hours times $300 an hour is a heck of a lot better than 10 hours times $200 an hour, right? So rate doesn't help. So what do you look at? You look at where's the case. You look at what have other cases like this particular file looked like, hopefully in that area, and which of the firms that are available seem from results over time to be most likely in this particular case to get the best result. Now, we do not have an eye toward the decision will ever be made by an AI. That's not in scope. It's not something we're considering. We'd never do it. Okay. A couple different reasons. Fundamentally, because we think our claim people have to be able to talk to the firms and talk to the insureds and make a judgment call. But we certainly can give them a point of information that says, okay, got 20 firms here. These are evaluated by the AI based on past results as to likely be the top five. Uh, Part of the reason, and this is real key, and as we talk a little bit later, for whatever it's worth, I'll give you my focus. This is a beginning stage. This is not kind of holy grail stuff. In order to really have the best firm, you have to have really good information about the incoming case in a place that can be fed to the AI historically and in the new case to be able to let them review everything. If you ask lit management guy what are the probably three most important factors, okay, about a case beyond the facts, right? The facts are the facts, and that's in a text narrative. We can't feed a text narrative in a complaint to an AI. It won't do any good. What else do you look at? Who's opposing counsel? Not just the law firm. Who's the lawyer? Okay. Is John Smith? John Smith doesn't do you any good. You need the bar number, for example, of the lawyer. What judge is it in front of? Well, you don't know that the day the lawsuit is filed, what judge you're going to get. So that's never going to be knowable. What's the jury pool like? Now, there are certain jurisdictions that everybody knows are pretty bad, but there's an awful lot of jurisdictions out there, and nobody knows all of them. But worst comes to worst, you can get a guess, but we don't know because when the complaint comes in, this is a limitation in what Chubb can do today. Our file intake process doesn't store Third Circuit, Eastern District of Pennsylvania, right? Third Circuit, Eastern District doesn't really work. Eastern District of Kentucky, right? Or New York State Supreme Court. Might be in Brooklyn. Brooklyn's a completely different case than the Bronx, completely different case than Westchester County. That's a really important factor as to how bad the case is. Um, there are some lawyers out there that we know that will not take a case, humans that will not take a case unless it's a seven-figure case. But that's not on the complaint for us to feed to the AI. So the way we're looking at decision support is it's a first step. It's sort of getting the AI to be used by our folks to help at the point of decision to give them a point of information for them to do further analysis as they need to get to the best firm. It's not going to be foolproof. We don't believe it will. That's why we're looking at some of the later phases of AI development to be much more, we think, ultimately actionable and useful. Hope that answers your question, Jeff.
Yeah, no, it does. How do you, so you mentioned that there's a lot of different data that you don't have at the time. How do you go about trying to fill in the gaps and get that?
Um, so this is where we get to kind of later phases of what we're building with you folks. Um, we're about to be rolling out. We actually have it in pilot now. Something in our T360 platform called the case assessment module. And what it does is it feeds to the law firm a couple different ways that they can get certain very specific patterned information into the system, which will then be able to bring it into the pool for the AI. So we're putting on a particular format, a place for them to put the bar ID of the lawyer that is handling the case opposite them. Who's the judge? Who are the expert witnesses? Different kind of formatted pieces of information that over the life of the case, as they get the judge, they're supposed to update us with the judge. So the AI will then know about the judge for all the cases. And then 2 years from now, we'll be able to see, well, every time this judge is on a case, the exposure ultimately ends up on the high side of what we expected the range to be. Maybe we should look at cases that are in front of this judge that are active and new. Um, so we're going to collect the information over time from counsel. We do not want to have this to be a data entry exercise from our folks, right? Counsel knows who they're opposite. Counsel can fill in a field real quick. We'd have to do research to try to fill in these blanks, and we're not going to do it. So the case assessment module will be a really usable tool for us to start developing that more specific data over time.
Sure, thank you. Um, so amongst the the user base of at Chubb that you've kind of early on in this process decided were the right people to to work with on this. Some are more receptive than others, and you want to go to the ones who are excited about it. How has their viewpoint been on this? I mean, how do they like it? How do they see that working out as kind of their first phase of the analysis? Prior to moving on with their assignments or their budget or
Yep.
whatnot.
So of the groups that are piloting, and right now we're in sort of phase 3 of tweaking the analytics engine that's making the recommendations. We're doing feedback surveys of our internal people. Our people are doing it, right? It's not like we've delegated it to ELM to do it, because our data scientists are trying to figure out whether this is a tool that will be used by our team. Um,
Mhm.
because the because the plan is to deliver the information in the same place in the user interface where they're already making their assignments. Um, there's been uniform, well, it can't possibly be a bad thing, to it can help. Depends on who you're talking to, but there's been no feedback so far that suggests that it's a negative. Part of it is we have again made it very, very, very clear that there is no intent, plan, possibility of the decision being made by the engine rather than by them. So I'm sure we'll find as we go broad with it, there'll be some people who will be convinced that machines are coming to replace them, um, but we haven't run up against them yet. Um, and those folks that are concerned about it just will ignore the information and make the decision in no worse a way than they do today.
All right. Thanks. Do you have any ways of have you thought about any ways of kind of measuring kind of the usage of this? Are they following the lead on, the recommended assignment?
Um,
It's
I
tough to
what I
measure because
think
it's only one piece, I
it's
understand,
yeah,
but
and we're not really, and we're in pilot phase too, right?
right.
So from a practical perspective, I think our view will be, and this is something to make clear to everybody on this. I am not a data scientist guy. I'm a lit management guy, right? That's my background. I manage claims for a living before I do what I do now. So I'm really lit management. Um, from what I have learned about AI is it's dumber on day one than it is on day 1,000. Right? There's a constant feedback cycle of making it better. What we know for sure is that the model will be tweaked over time. Part of it's going to result in sort of the intake of the information, Jeff, is going to be feedback mechanisms that we're going to have in place to say, okay, you didn't hire one of the top five. Why? Not because we're questioning whether they should have, but to educate about what factors that they were aware of that caused them to perhaps pick a different option, and then take that information and over time build that up to be included in the scoring mechanism. So where we'll measure it is 2 years after we turn it on, whether the top five is being used at a higher percentage than it used to be. We're assuming the answer will be yes, because the model is going to get better, which means
Right.
that it's going to be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Got it. Thanks. Okay, we have a question here related to this, kind of around the measuring total case cost as it relates to picking the right law firm. So, what analytics do you surface which considers performance total case cost, where you consider settlement costs in addition to prosecution costs and time to resolve?
Um, Excellent questions. I'm not sure what kind of company Ethan works for. It sounds like you work for an insurance company. Uh, it depends on what kind of company you work for too. There's severity in there. You'll often find that the cases that go to firms that have the worst outcomes are really the toughest cases, and we pick the firms that get the worst outcomes because they're the best firms, right? So you can't really look at it that way. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're not 100% sure how we're going to do total cost of claim in the model by the time we get to fully implemented on it. There, to a certain extent, you can, law of large numbers, look at things over how things have developed, right? What's the first budget? What's the last budget? We can also look at internal things like our case reserving, what projections our folks have put up on files, um, uh, taking the early projections and the final total spent. So you can look at things as they develop over time. We are already, and for 7 years now, have been identifying with very specific workflows in T360 the nature of the assignment. We use something called Smart Select, case management. There's different things in different systems, I guess, that ELM provides, where we are very linear in it's this kind of case, and here's the panel, aviation, D&O, EPL, whatever it is, to kind of set up the nature of the case. We can also tell by the identification of the claim handler whether they're in a severity group or a frequency group, whether they tend to
Mhm.
handle bigger cases or lots of smaller cases. And we think we'll be able to, over time, put those pieces together to make the AI a little bit smarter. But we're not doing it yet because we're not that far yet in how the model will be built.
Gotcha. Okay. And thank you for that. And before we move on to the last topic, just one thing I wanted to chime in with, as Jonathan had talked about something, is, he mentioned that in his evaluation of who the right firm is, there's a number of different metrics they look at. What their rate is isn't necessarily top of the list. We look at that as something that's relatively configurable. So when we build that out, in partnership with Chubb, we build that out with 24, 26 kind of different areas that we're able to look at in that evaluation process. And then we work with our individual customers to help identify where their priorities are. So for somebody else, it may be I want to pay the lowest rate, and we can put the most weight on that. So
Yep.
it's fairly flexible within that. All right, so finally, how are we doing on time? Okay, we're okay. Let's talk about AI for invoice review. I know that you've had bill review in place for a long time. Before we get kind of into the weeds of technology, I mean, just how valuable has the existence of that type of program been for you guys?
I will start and underline and stress that we do not view bill review to be an exercise in achieving savings. We don't look at it that way, right? The perfect bill from our perspective goes into the system with no reductions and comes out of the system with no reductions. What does that mean? That means that the vendor, the law firm, has submitted a bill with no math errors, using all the right rates for the right people, having the right people of the right status level, partner, associate, paralegal, doing all of the tasks, following to the letter all of our litigation management guidelines. If that firm submits that bill that way, we are pleased as can be to pay them 100% of what they submitted. Hard stop. Okay. However, sometimes firms make math errors. Sometimes worse. Now, the machine doesn't need really AI to find math errors. Sometimes lawyers do things that maybe lawyers shouldn't do and maybe paralegals should do, or associates do things that maybe are clerical and in our litigation management guidelines aren't billable. So that's why we have human beings look at it, right? A human being is going to be able to better say, okay, I've seen these kinds of phrases before. And that generally means that it's not analytics work. That generally means that it's perhaps collating work, summarizing work, maybe work that a paralegal, from an ethical, appropriate bill review perspective, ought to be doing. Humans can do that. Now, humans do that better at 10 o'clock in the morning than they do at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Humans do that better with a 4 hour line item than I do a 0.2 hour line item. Just human nature. So what we were finding was that the human bill review was doing a good job of finding an appropriate billing to bring it back to the vendor, to the law firm to be able to appeal. But not as good as they could, right? Because human beings have human being frailty. So what do? You bolt on the AI. AI doesn't look at the language any different if it's had a cup of coffee or not, or whether it's 0.2 hours or 20 hours, right? The AI is just looking at language. They're looking at different ways of phrasing something, uh, and it's flagging for the reviewer. Again, it's not replacing the reviewer. It is flagging for the reviewer things that the reviewer ought to pay attention to. 2 points to make. When I kind of unofficially started to learn about this, for those that are familiar with the naming conventions in at least T360, I don't know what it's called in Passport, something called ITP, invoice testing process. I kind of view this as invoice testing process on steroids. Basically, it's just a machine looking at things in a far more gray sort of way with far more interpretive abilities, but it's still just putting a flag on a line for somebody to look at. All right. Number one. Number two, it is critical to understand, just like I talked about, the data and the models get better. Our bill review team is partnering with the data scientists at ELM to make the flagging mechanism better, right? We don't want the machine flagging something that's right. So we educate it to ignore certain things. And if it misses a reduction that probably should have been flagged by the machine, then there's regularly scheduled data calls where the two teams get calibrated, and over time the model gets smarter and smarter using the language that our firms tend to put in the bill, but educated by, I think, the $140 million database that Jeff referenced, that kind of help build the foundation. So you start with the foundation of the more generic billing pool, and then you tweak it based on the kinds of billing that your company generally sees, so that when your bill reviewers look at it, whether it's the claim professionals, the lawyers, or you have your own stand aside alone team, or you use an outside team, right? You partner with LBA or somebody else. It makes them more effective, it makes them more efficient, and it makes them more accurate. So they're only flagging the things for the law firm that they should be, and not missing stuff, but not flagging stuff that they shouldn't. It's been very successful for us.
Thanks. And you raised an important point there with kind of talking about that calibration process, both the manual one by the teams talking to each other, but also the data-driven calibration process where it's machine learning. The AI takes the information back in of what actually happened to this invoice that we made these recommendations on, so that can continue to you know get smarter over time. And smarter doesn't necessarily mean more right. I mean, smarter just means more like the client wants it to be that you're working with. So, adopt those behaviors and become more, more automated up front.
I think that actually goes to Frank. We just got a call, a chat question. I think that's exactly the answer um, that you're referring to there, Jeff. Yes, the lawyers do get better at billing more appropriately, and because we're not looking for savings, we're looking to pay the right amount. We are fine with that. We are fine with that. Um, we don't want to. We don't want to cut a bill. We want them to bill for exactly what they did, using the guidelines that we provided them as a guide to make sure that they're performing the way we expect. And if they word their bills that way, that's fine. Um, we still have the bill review professionals and our claim professionals, and for the legal department, internal lawyers, to still take a last look at the bill. And if they called something else, human beings are still going to hopefully be able to pick that up. But if they just bill accurately, all for it.
Yep. And actually, I'm not sure these are visible to everybody. So Frank's question was, since
Oh,
lawyers
sorry.
use words as tools, have you seen your vendors educate themselves on words that bypass AI flags for the same activity? So kind of just to pile on to Jonathan's answer, that is a challenge that we run into more on where he talks about ITP rules, or what we call platform rules, which are non-AI solutions, which kind of really leverage on keyword searches. So if you don't pay for internal meetings, you may reject the code or reject the line item based on the code being submitted, indicating an internal meeting, and then look for a set of keywords, internal meeting, team, whatever the case may be. But with the AI's use of natural language processing, it's able to cut past a lot more of the noise and make it a little bit less reliant on some of the keyword searches that you may see typically. But as Jonathan mentioned, I mean, that's why at the end of the day you also have people looking at this at the end. The AI is there to highlight things and put the right information in front of them, and really across an invoice with a couple hundred line items on it, being able to tell them, hey, if you look at these 20 line items, these are the most important ones. These are the ones that are most likely to have some sort of issue. Okay, we have a second question here. Do you use analytics to develop AFAs and fix costs for certain matter types?
I'll defer to you. I've actually spoken at industry events about how bad fixed fees are as a concept for the customer. So we don't use
So I
them at
should
all.
probably answer this one.
Yeah, um, we think they're a really bad idea as a company, so we don't use them.
Fair enough. Yeah, amongst our customer base, we have a fairly steady mix of ones who are strong proponents of AFAs and getting cost certainties across their portfolio, and ones who just want to pay the right rates for the right work, and whatever it is, it is. So amongst the pro AFA crowd, we see a lot of value, especially early in the process, helping them build this program by um, you know getting to something that's compliant, getting to something that's leveraging the right bill codes and activity codes, and representing the type of work that's actually being performed, and then finding that does give them better analytics and a better ability to look at their different firms and different matter types in kind of an apples to apples way, so that they can start making real comparisons, and you know and get to some cost certainty and develop some AFAs that way. With a fixed cost, there's no detailed invoice review. Yes and no. Some are strong believers in that. Some do like us to continue with some level of invoice review, even across fixed cost cases, because it's not always the case where you want to look at getting to agreement on what that fixed cost may be as the final stage, and then writing that out kind of indefinitely. We have some who like to continue to evaluate and continue to a year from now, 2 years from now, have an understanding of was that deal we cut 2 years ago, were our assumptions that we made 2 years ago still the right ones, or has that changed along with the landscape? And this type of analysis helps them with that.
I'll add a couple sentences
Okay.
if I could, Jeff. To the extent we recommend it against it, it's because it's very hard for the law firm and the customer to have an equal understanding of what the costs really should be to find a mutually fair number. right? So to the extent that you run the AI on detailed billing to get to a more accurate hourly rate based number, then you can find the average easier, right? If the bill comes in at $10,000 and should have been $9,000, and then you calculate what the flat fee should be based on 10 grand, you've just gotten your average cost too high. So it does help with getting you to the right price more accurately when you negotiate those.
Thanks. Um, we have one more question. Do you use any type of value-based billing within litigation?
We do not. Part of the reason, and I'm not, we're not as a company critical of this. We really don't, because of the nature of what we are. Not big. It's not a size thing. We're what's called a frequency, not a frequency, excuse me, severity carrier, which means that our exposures tend to be very different from one to the other. We don't have 50,000 cases in Manhattan with a $50,000 auto insurance policy limit like a Geico does. Um, we don't have lots and lots and lots of small policies. We have some small policies and some big policies. So looking at the values of what a case might be are entirely dependent on the nature of the policies that we're selling, and they vary too wildly for them for that really to be a useful basis for us to look at things.
All right, thank you. And with that, we did a pretty good job. We're at about a minute and a half left. Before we close, if any questions pop into the chat in the next minute, we'll do our best. But otherwise, thank you again, Jonathan, as always, for your time today and for working with us on this. Thanks to all the attendees for your time and for the questions. Feel free to reach out to myself or or through Colin if you have any questions or you'd like to reach out for follow-up or ask about some of the stuff that we're doing. We're here and we're available. So thank you.